And volunteering and offering volunteering to employees is a tangible way to make them feel like actually there's more, we're offering you more than just a job, a paycheck, etc.
Without a strong company culture, a growing business cannot thrive. But many founders find it really hard to distill what makes a great culture, what elements to include, and how to demonstrate that their company cares about its people and the local community. This is why I'm so delighted to be joined today by Fung Ng, founder of Matchable, an employee volunteering platform that is revolutionising employee engagement and helping companies create a really warm, kind and inclusive culture. Today on Sound Advice, we'll explore the link between engaged employees and improved company performance and how Matchable helps solidify this connection. And you'll discover how volunteering can help you retain top talent and attract new hires. Thank you so much for joining me, Fung. Welcome.
Lovely to be here. Thanks, Bex.
So tell me a bit about where your journey with volunteering started. When did this start to feel like an avenue you wanted to pursue professionally?
So I can tell you the origin story.
Yeah, sure. Tell me the origin story.
So just by way of background, so I'm Asian, as you can probably tell, and I was brought up in a very Asian culture. So my parents were always like, grow up to be an accountant, a lawyer, a doctor. And so I kind of sort of was a good Asian daughter. So I basically sort of, went to uni, I went to Cambridge and I read law with French law. And of course that's now no longer exists, sadly. And then I decided I didn't want to be a lawyer, so I became an accountant and I joined one of the big four. And I was there for 13 years, sort of living out my parents' dream, I think, but also I really enjoyed it as well, most of the time. But what happened after 13 years was I started realizing that I guess what I was doing day to day didn't align anymore with my personal values.
So what changed? You were, as you say, living out your parents' dream, but was that not fulfilling for you?
I think, to be honest, for a long time, I really loved what I was doing. I think I always, a lot of my key values around challenge and sort of feeling challenged and growing constantly. And I think in that kind of environment, especially in the city, there's a lot of structure and hierarchy. So you constantly feel like you're progressing and challenging yourself. But one thing that happened was I actually started getting panic attacks at work. And I think for a really long time, I sort of worked on the assumption that if I put my mind to something, I could do it. And I think the fact that my body started telling me that this wasn't right or something wasn't right actually really threw me. And it made me sort of reevaluate, why are these panic attacks happening? Is this really what I want to do? And as a result of that, I ended up sort of taking a 3-month sabbatical from work, and I realised that what I have been doing day to day just was no longer aligning with me, and I'm what you call an elderly millennial, so I was very much about finding my purpose in life. And I was like, if that's not what I want to do with my life, then what is my purpose? So I ended up kind of taking 3 months to just explore different things. And that's actually when I came across this opportunity at Matchable. So I had a side hustle, which was called Suits and Startups, and it was all around bringing together people in the city and entrepreneurs. So I found so inspiring, so motivating, like the ultimate in, sort of giving up everything to pursue a dream. And off the back of that, I realized I wanted to be in startups, but I didn't actually have my own idea. So I started actually looking up founder roles that were coming out of incubators and, Founders Factory, Entrepreneur First, etc. And I ended up finding this role at Matchable, which had come out of an incubator that was created by 8 of the UK's largest charities. So that included the British Red Cross, the British Heart Foundation, the RSPCA, etc. And they had actually come together to think up ideas that would solve some of their collective problems as charities. And one of the things they were finding was that there was a disconnect between what people kind of thought volunteering was, which was, painting fences, planting trees, etc., versus what the charities needed, which was actually skills-based volunteering. These people who were coming to do all this stuff, were very, very skilled, people in business and marketing and tech, etc. So they wanted to create a skills-based volunteering platform, but they needed a founder to do that. So I applied for the job and I got it. So that was 5 years ago.
That is so amazing. I didn't know that there was a potential to want to kind of start and build a business from scratch, but be able to apply for that as kind of looking for a role in a more kind of traditional way, like a job hunting way. That's really interesting, and I'm sure our listeners will find that fascinating. And obviously with your background, you must have really stood out because you were working with numbers in big business. You were really high up as a member of the Big Four. So they must have really seen that you had kind of the potential to really revolutionise this idea. But is it right that when you started, the business looked a bit different and you actually had to hone the model and pivot slightly away from the business that you initially joined? Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I started, it was actually Matchable was an idea. So they literally said, build a skills-based volunteering platform. Here's some very, very early sort of pre-seed money to get you going. They had some advisors around to support, with fundraising and business plan, etc. But it was basically kind of really nice, actually, that I could just build what I thought, Matchable should look like. So I had a lot of free reign around it. And I guess, Matchable has actually been through quite a few iterations. And also, so I started Matchable in 2019. That first year was just me. And I did a small round so that I could hire my first half employee, Rosie, she's amazing. And then subsequent to that, hired 3 more team members, but that ended up being the beginning of COVID, so sort of March 2020, at which point we actually were still in the kind of customer development phase. We're trying to figure out actually what do people want out of this platform, what does success look like. And we started with a B2B model, so we ended up selling into learning and development teams, because we would say, you can upskill your teams through these incredible projects. It's experiential learning, but also, you're doing it with purpose. So it gives it even more meaning. And we had started getting these contracts in around L&D, for training teams at, like marketing at L'Oreal, like Monzo, etc. But what happened when COVID hit was that actually all of these, everyone panicked, and all of the companies stopped the budgets that they didn't feel were essential to running the businesses day to day. So L&D budgets got cut, benefit budgets got cut, and actually a lot of the people we had been in discussions with who were L&D managers actually just disappeared from one day to the next. So we also were like, well, maybe this isn't the route we should go down if there's no longer demand here. At the same time, there was this whole wave around NHS and helping your community, and we're all in this together. So we ended up actually for a short time pivoting to B2C. So we actually onboarded individuals who wanted to volunteer. We had a database of projects that we had collated, and we allowed individual sort of freelancers, people who just wanted to do good, to come onto the platform and actually pick projects themselves. And the one thing with that kind of business model with B2C is you need scale and volume to make it viable as a business. So we tested a subscription model. And we got about maybe 100 people onto, over a couple of months volunteering through us and paying us to get access to the projects, which was amazing. But we also got a lot of pushback because, the kind of general premise is that why should I pay to volunteer? I'm giving my time already. What are you bringing to me that I couldn't just, go and find myself? And of course, as a business, we actually had to put in a lot of effort to try and find really innovative, impact startups, social enterprises that you wouldn't find elsewhere, where you can actually effect change through a 30-minute project on a global scale. One of my favorite organizations is called Choco for Peace, and they actually help reskill previously Colombian cocaine growers into cocoa farmers, and they use blockchain to make sure that they're fairly remunerated. So incredibly innovative, impactful, that you just from your own desk would never have the idea that you could do that. And so we were finding these organizations, but it's very difficult to take people on a journey from your traditional volunteering, where it's maybe you're kind of, going to weed a garden, to this and what it could look like. And we actually realized through that the market just wasn't ready for sort of B2C. So we then pivoted back to B2B. But we took a lot of learnings from that, actually, and that's kind of the platform that we now have at Matchable.
So now, do you have organisations coming to you? So it's always businesses of a certain size, shall we say, where there's a number of employees who want to get involved with volunteering? Or do you have a lot of kind of small businesses, kind of little, even one-man band still coming and saying, look, I want to get involved?
Yeah, absolutely. So our smallest client at Match was 2 people. They're an animation house called Tin Mouse, and they're so cool. They're a B Corp. And they just wanted access to kind of projects they could do, where they would use their animation skills to support charities. So they're our smallest, but then our 2 largest are 4,000 employees each. And we are across 15 different countries because of the fact that we can do remote volunteering. So our 2 largest clients are both in marketing. One's called Dentsu, one's called Havas. And yeah, so it's quite, as long as the organizer or the company wants to offer paid volunteering to their staff, whatever size or industry they're in, we can support them. So it's quite nice in that way.
And tell me why, because obviously from an individual's perspective, there is this learning and development piece where you're going into a new environment and you're really testing your skills, but you're also learning. But there's also this connection, isn't there, between companies wanting to create more of a culture, a really tangible culture, and volunteering, it can really contribute to that. So tell me why, in terms of the business case, why are so many companies keen to say to their employees, come on, let's go do this thing?
Yeah, I mean, so a lot of the drive around Matchable comes from my own experience being in the Big Four. And I think one thing that you can get carried away with when you're in a company that's, day to day, very busy, you're trying to deliver on certain targets, and it can feel very much like, you've lost a bit of a sense of maybe purpose, especially in Big Four. You have incredibly large organizations as clients, and it's all around the millions of pounds or billions of pound deals that you're doing, and it just kind of feels very money driven and can feel quite empty sometimes. And I think that's why, especially I think the millennial generation, Gen Z, etc., all really value purpose, community, giving back, and volunteering and offering volunteering to employees is a tangible way to make them feel like actually there's more, we're offering you more than just a job, a paycheck, etc. You can come to us, and obviously this is a growing trend where, companies need to offer employees everything, not just, but purpose in life and something more than that day to day, and volunteering is such a tangible way to do that. I think that's why it resonates, and also can impact culture so quickly.
I know exactly what you mean, because I started my career working for a private equity magazine, and I would spend my days writing up these multi-million pound deals, and then you'd leave the publishing house and there'd be like people homeless begging outside the office, and it was like, I'm living in this bubble. I'm like talking about these huge numbers and these like huge investment houses who are just paying out enormous amounts to their shareholders, which is great, but this is not what the real world looks like. And there can be that disconnect, can't there?
100%.
And then tell me about the growth then at Matchable. So you said it's been through a few iterations, but do you feel like now you've landed on exactly the right kind of recipe for success? And what does success look like for you guys? Is it about how many volunteers come through your doors, or the impact that you make in terms of what those skills are doing within those organizations? Tell me about that.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I've learned with startup life, coming from a very structured corporate life prior to this, is that every time I set a goal, it will change inevitably. Yeah. And so our North Star, just as Matchable, as an organisation, is meaningful matches. So we just want to make sure that people, not just match with a project, but also just have that moment where they really feel, I've made a difference. Like, you don't just expect to kind of, you don't want it to feel just like work. You want it to feel like I've given back, and I'm I feel good about it as well. And obviously, like, on the other side, a big part of doing this is around the impact you can make, globally, locally, etc., for the world across so many different causes. So we have meaningful matches as a North Star, because it kind of brings together both, like the employee satisfaction, volunteer satisfaction angle, but also, kind of like the charitable angle and the number of lives you can impact, or the number of CO2 you can reduce, and all that kind of stuff as well. I would say in terms of business metrics, so we've done 3 rounds of funding so far. And I think it's interesting as well to see the startup landscape, and you probably know, but go from success looks like, Series A, Series B, and grow as fast as you can, but you can still be loss making, but as long as you kind of shoot for the moon, and we need the biggest team possible, to, I think, now the perception of what success looks like as a business, which is more kind of, we should be stable, sustainable, profitable, and not necessarily have, be spending on huge teams, huge salaries. Let's build the best and most solid business we can, as efficiently as possible. And obviously with AI as well, you can do so much more with less. So I think as a business, we've actually kind of been through that journey as well. We broke even this year, which was, to be honest, as a founder, knowing that cash flow isn't, an issue so much now is incredibly, it's literally like a huge weight lifted off your shoulders. So I'm very happy about that. And then, of course, off the back of this, just looking to keep growing as much as possible.
Because are you guys mainly focused on the UK? Because this obviously is a global market. Is the plan to be sort of across the whole world and offering these opportunities on every continent?
I would love that. I think the reality is we are still kind of still early stages, early days in the UK. We have quite a good brand and brand reputation in the UK already, and most of the way we started to do that is by onboarding like UK headquartered companies that have branches across the world. So we are across 15 different countries as a result of being able to offer remote-based projects that you can do from anywhere. But there are still, every country has its own kind of view of what volunteering looks like, the priority that it kind of takes in their own culture and business. And I think there's a lot of those kinds of like subtleties as well that we still need to figure out before we go global. But that's the dream.
And just for our small business listeners who, if we're realistic, in a small business, people wear a lot of hats, don't they? And it can be incredibly busy. So sometimes I think the idea of taking time out of a business that's growing and where people are already sometimes stretched, that might feel like it's too much. But like, do you think that there's more interest from the small business community in terms of, you know, yes, we can do this, we can plan it in to actually let our people have a volunteering experience? Is that a kind of direction of travel at the moment?
That's a really good question. I would say, to be honest, that's a problem that we've encountered in both small and all the way to large businesses, especially in this environment. So one of the things we've sort of learned through the years is that everyone is always busy. And you know how Netflix say, you know, our main competitors sleep. And we're like, actually, you know, for us, we do offer volunteering projects that literally last 30 minutes and you can do them at lunchtime. And our star volunteer at the moment has done 22 30-minute projects, all with 22 different organizations over the course of a year, you know, in her lunch break, which is incredible. So it's definitely possible. But, you know, like we need to make the, volunteering opportunities, but also kind of create or kind of, you know, convey the message that, you know, if you have a lunch break, why would you pick this over, you know, actually maybe going for a walk or having a therapy session, having a nap? You know, how do we make volunteering be as appealing as possible? And so we spend a lot of time kind of trying to do that, like with the kinds of projects and organizations I mentioned, kind of cutting down projects into very bite-sized, chunks. So like people call it micro-volunteering sometimes, and you can definitely do that. But I would say it is still difficult sometimes for employees in companies to feel like they have permission to do that. And so one trend we are also seeing is a trend towards team, group, everyone together, you know, maybe out at a food bank or, you know, taking a full day where it feels more like we have permission to do this because the company's organised it, they've put it in our diaries, and actually everyone is doing it at the same time. So it has been interesting, and it very much depends on the culture of the organisation, but we're seeing a bit of both at the moment.
And what are the skills that you're really looking for? Like you mentioned that there are some really exciting projects out there, but what are the kinds of people that you're really excited about coming forward and kind of joining Matchable? Because there must be like a sweet spot where charities are thinking, oh, come on, find me these people.
Definitely. I think, so when you think about it from the charity side, so we call them impact organizations because we cover charities, social enterprises, community interest companies, and impact startups as well. So any organization like that, one of the criteria we have, especially for impact startups, is that they wouldn't be able to afford the skills that the volunteers are offering. And so often the skills that are required are the ones that maybe are, you know, like they're the next step above just keeping the business going. So not nice to have, but they are like the thing that you want to be able to afford, but you can't. So things like marketing and brand building, really valuable actually to, you know, get these organizations funding, raise their profile, all that kind of stuff, but often the kind of skill that they can't pay for. So those skills definitely. Tech is a huge one. A lot of our impact startups are building incredible platforms, things like that. We have one organization called AfriLearn, and they are basically creating a platform that makes education, high quality education, affordable to Africans across the continent, like, you know, through tech, which is incredible. And they're looking to kind of do more through AI, gamification, like all that kind of stuff. And you know, they have such incredible and interesting projects, but you need tech skills to do that, and obviously tech is very expensive. So I think tech and marketing are probably the ones that the organizations look for most.
Oh, that's interesting. You heard it here, listeners. If you're in tech or marketing, this could be one for you. And then we've talked a bit about how volunteering can help companies build a stronger culture. Tell me about the culture at Matchable and how you've made it as strong and as vibrant as it possibly can be. What's been your secret to building a great culture?
You probably have to ask my team that. I think one thing that was really interesting is, so coming from Big Four culture, I learned a lot about what looks good, I suppose, and but also what could be improved. And I think that was actually so essential for me to kind of as a stepping stone to become a leader here at Matchable, and also kind of create the culture that really I wanted to see. But I think, just, kind of taking the best bits from that and building on it. I think one of the things that I have found really essential actually for us is creating an environment where people feel comfortable to fail and admit that something has gone wrong, without feeling like they're going to be told off or, it's going to impact their job or the perception of them at work. Because one thing that did happen to me, through the panic attacks at the Big Four, I think it did make me feel, maybe I don't know if it was my own perception of myself obviously changed, and I lost confidence, but I also felt like the team lost confidence in me as a result of, having these panic attacks. And I think one of the things, it was actually truly gutting because, I've been there for 13 years. I've done great work, in the company. And I think this one sort of incident, instead of, I think, feeling supported by the team, it felt like everyone just went, oh, actually, steer clear of that because, that person is now broken. We're not really sure if, we should give her any more work. Can she handle it? And I think as a result of that experience, I've always wanted to ensure that if, in at Matchable, no one ever feels like that. So I think really valuing mental health, but also just creating that environment where everyone can show up, however they're feeling actually, as long as you do your work, it doesn't matter where you are, when you're working, and also, let's all support each other. So if you're going through a tough time, we all want to know about it, and we want to support you because all of this contributes to you feeling safe, like you can show up as your best self, and also in you doing your best work because you feel you have that support. That's kind of the premise on which Matchable's culture is built.
Yeah, I mean, that's the best way to learn, not just from great managers and, great company culture, but also from really bad experiences and times when people get things wrong. That can sometimes be a far more powerful learning experience. But Fung, do you remember what caused the panic attacks? Was it just a lot of things kind of stacking up over time? You mentioned that you had a side hustle as well as a high-powered job, for example. You must have been flat out most of the time. But what was it that was kind of the thing that ended up snapping?
There was something around the environment, but also mainly pressure I'd put on myself, I think. So when I left my job in Big Four, I was a director, and it's the level just below partner. And I was being told, by a lot of partners I was working for, oh, you can make partner in 2 years, which is considered very fast, obviously. And I think as a result of that, you have to meet certain criteria, obviously, to make partner, but a lot of it is around, billing a lot, and, having clients that love you, but mainly around billing, I would say. And so as a result of that, I think I felt a pressure, maybe self-imposed really, to take on as much as I could. And so I ended up sort of picking up so many projects. And what then happened was, so I was in quite a technical role. I was giving, tax structuring advice, on deals, M&A deals. And the thing is with tax is it's based on real legislation that if you aren't up to speed or you don't know the situation properly, then you can actually end up giving wrong advice. And I think one of the things with me, what I've learned just in terms of my own, knowing my strengths and weaknesses, is that I'm quite an anxious person, and clearly, but also it made me very, very anxious when I started getting so many emails because I was on so many projects that I felt I was not up to speed on the deals that I was, kind of giving advice on. And I would worry a lot that I was giving the wrong advice, and I felt unprepared when I was showing up on calls, which is not a great place to be. And the thing with the legislation is there is actually only one right answer. So if you don't give the right answer, then it's wrong, and for me, that dynamic, I was not comfortable with that amount of risk, just personally. And there are, obviously there's, great partners out there who actually are comfortable saying like, look, hey, I'm going to take that away and I'm going to think about it, which is also maybe what I should have done. But it just felt like overwhelming. And alongside the volume and this pressure I put on myself, what started happening as well was that I started feeling like, quite a morbid thought, but when you think about in the future on my deathbed, when I look back at my life, is this what I want to have achieved? Hundreds of amazing big money deals. And for me personally, it didn't feel like enough. So there was this dichotomy between working really hard and feeling like I was losing control, and also this underlying kind of sort of feeling that actually I'm working really hard at a thing that actually I don't really believe anymore is right for me. And I think that's what actually caused the panic attacks. It was the culmination of those two things.
And how did you come back from it? Because you mentioned seeing yourself differently, even the fact that you couldn't rely on your body to behave in the way that you needed it to in that moment. That sounds like that can create a real crisis of confidence. But then you're going into a role where you're building a business from scratch, and that takes oodles of confidence. So how did you go from A to B and rebuild yourself? Or how did you make that journey so that you could start in this role confident and determined to succeed, and knowing that you could do what you put your mind to?
It took a long time, to be honest. So when I left kind of the Big Four, I took this sabbatical and I had my own sort of identity crisis, because for a very long time I had been defined by my job, actually. And I was very proud to say I was the director there. And if anyone, when anyone asks you to introduce yourself, you'd immediately say, "Hey, I'm Fung. I'm a director at Big Four." And, that was who you were. And so when I didn't have that anymore, it made me question a lot of things, kind of what was important to me, what I wanted to do with my life, why am I here? And it was kind of exacerbated as well because, as I mentioned, I'm Asian and I have very Asian parents. So I would go back home and my mum and my stepdad would be like, "Fung, are you lost? What's going on? Suck it up. Just get on with it." And I think one thing that really helped direct me was the panic attacks, but also the fact that they would say, they're Gen X, baby boomers. They would say, "Suck it up. Your mental health isn't that important. Just, just make partner. Once you make partner, you can do anything." And I think, hearing that and having such a reaction to it, being like, actually, I don't want that. I realize I don't want that at all. And that's not okay, that I don't want to live like that. really helped me understand what I didn't want. So that was good. And then it was a matter of kind of figuring out then who am I and what do I want. And so I remember at the time, like, kind of just taking time, like not putting pressure on myself, but just taking time to go and meet people I found interesting, like explore different things, figure out what I really enjoyed, but also what drains my energy and all that kind of stuff, and giving myself that permission to do that. And then I think that's kind of eventually how I realised, I really want to be in startup world and I want to try being a founder. And the one thing about being a founder that, like, I've never had a panic attack as a founder, even though I think the perception is the pressure is a lot higher. There's a lot more riding on what you do day to day. But the one thing I realised was that fear that I always had to give the right answer, that doesn't exist at all in startup world. Like literally every day we are trying and failing to do things, and it's okay. And I think for me, that felt so reassuring and so much more in line with me and my character and how I like to work. So I think that was also something that kind of led me there.
Yeah, I was literally going to ask that, whether you ever experienced a panic attack under the pressure of building a business, which, as you say, is extraordinary, especially when you have investors. But it's really interesting that the experience of it is so different because the environment around you is so different. And obviously you were talking about creating this culture where people are allowed to fail, and that applies to you as well, which must be incredibly reassuring to be part of a team where you're all just doing your best, and if it goes wrong you work together to fix it as quickly as possible, but it's like not the end of the world. You're not going to lose your position in the organization. That just sounds like quite a lovely way to live your life and build a career, really.
It's such a privilege, to be honest, to be able to do what I do and what my team does. I love it. I actually really just love building, and figuring out how to make the business work, learning new things, and just and having that environment, exactly like you say, where you can experiment and you can try new things. And also the things that you want to try, you can just make them happen straight away. There's not 10 layers of sign off and, it takes ages to do anything. But yeah, it's, I'm just very grateful for finding this. And yeah, even on the hardest days, it's still more me, I think. And that's why I've not had the panic attacks.
And what has the hardest day been while you've been building this business? Because as you mentioned, it's not all smooth sailing, but can you tell me about particularly challenging time and I guess how you got through it? I would like to know how you got past that challenging time.
Yeah, my God, so many. I think one of the things I found hardest actually running Matchable and my own company has been people management. When I was in Big Four, I loved talking about personal development and, my career progression and all that kind of stuff. But actually now being the person who manages the team, it's actually a lot harder just because, you're dealing with a lot of emotion and all that kind of stuff. And the thing is, obviously, like a lot of companies out there and startups out there, we've made redundancies, we've had people come and go ourselves. And I think one of the probably hardest moments for me so far has been, so last May, we actually made our whole sales team redundant. And it's so hard because these are people who bought into you, and your company and your mission and your dream, and they've come on board to help build that with you. And so, you love them as people, you believe in them and what they can deliver. And sometimes, unfortunately, because of, cash flow, the economics and business reasons, you have to let them go. And the difficult thing is also that, obviously, in that moment is about them. it's about them losing, stability. It's about ego. It's about all of those things that they're going through. And you can't make it about you at all, even though inside, your heart is breaking because, these are people that you love so much and you've worked together. And I found that really difficult to kind of try and keep as neutral as I could be. When you're delivering that news, when you're going through that process. And yeah, that was one of the hardest moments for me so far, yeah.
I don't think it's ever been harder to be a leader because the things you're responsible now compared to 50 years ago, right now, you're not just trying to lead a business to stability, profitability, all those things. You're also really, I guess, responsible for the people that work for you in a way that leaders never were before. Their mental health, their physical health. People are supposed to come to work and feel that they are their authentic self. That was never a thing. Even when I was starting my career, you left your authentic self at the door and you came and you were the automaton that was going to do the job. That's a huge shift. And yeah, heavy is the head that wears the crown. That's huge to have to try and balance those two often very opposing kind of pulls in your life where you want to do what's best for the business. The business has to survive. That is kind of the overriding aim. But then you're also trying to do that while protecting people and looking after them. That must be really hard sometimes to try and balance that.
100%. I think that's exactly how it feels sometimes. And I have definitely, through the years, been guilty of keeping people longer than I should have, just because I want to give them more chances and I want to believe in them and all of those things. And I think it is a sad lesson to have to learn that, like you say, the business has to come first, because if there's no business, then there's no salaries and there's no team anyway. And I think especially with things like cash flow and really managing that, it is, you maybe have to think about these things more often than you want to.
Do you feel like having your finance background has been a real asset here? Because you've been through fundraising. I mean, it must have been amazing to be able to read these contracts and think about things like interests and interest rates and loan amounts and all these things and know exactly what everyone's talking about. Has that been a real game changer? Because you probably haven't had to pay for that advice either because you know this stuff.
I guess, yeah, I would never have said it was a game changer, but I guess if I didn't have these skills, I would really miss them, because I think, I mentioned cash flow. That's definitely something I learnt as an accountant to manage. And also because I was doing sort of private equity and real estate deals at the time, knowing how to structure, a shareholding or, how it's funded and what all these different terms mean. It really did allow me to hit the ground running, especially because the first thing I did was fundraise when I started. So yeah, I think it does give you a huge advantage. And you're right, I've never had to pay for anyone apart from sign off on accounts, which I can no longer do. But yeah, it's definitely a plus.
And I've asked you for the darkest time while growing Matchable. I want to hear about the highlight. What's been the absolute highlight, if you can pick one, of the journey so far?
I think the happiest moments I've had, actually, oddly enough, weren't so much business related, but they're more looking, when sometimes you have a bit of an out of body moment where you're with a team and you think, actually, you know what, I created this. It's amazing. And I think there have been a few moments like that. Obviously the team has kind of grown and shrunk and all that kind of stuff, but I think the amazing thing with building your own company is you get to pick who you work with, which is so great. And I have loved every single person that we've ever hired. And I think, just there are these certain moments, snapshots in time, where we'll have a team social or a team building day or, whatever that is. And you have that moment where actually you look at everyone and you think, wow, this is so amazing that these people have bought into this, that we are building this together, and and it's very special. So I think there's a few moments that I can remember like that.
It's amazing when you talk about the out-of-body experience, because it is sometimes the great moments are always around other people and just appreciating like all the different elements that make a business, a project work, and having them all in the same room sometimes, and just being able to be like, oh wow, look at all this, it's all just like magic, the magic is happening.
100%.
And then finally, Fung, can you tell me about your most impactful volunteering experience? Because I imagine you've had a few over the course of building this business, but I'd love to know which one has really changed you, or where you learnt the most.
Oh, it's difficult.
Is this like picking your favourite child?
Every time I go on the platform at the moment, there's like new projects that are uploaded, and it's just organisations that you just you can't even like start to imagine what they do. You know what I mean? It's just incredible. So I get very excited every time I go on. I think one of the ones that actually is very popular actually on our platform, and felt like a huge reward in a very short space of time, is a project we have called Missing Maps. And basically what you can do is you log on, you literally can spend 10 minutes, and it will give you different maps of areas that have been affected by hurricanes or floods or whatever. And it will say, like in the Congo, 10,000 people have been displaced because of this flood. And what you do is you map out buildings and roads and things so that aid can actually be delivered real time to these places, because they now have a map that, will get them there. And the idea that is possible, I did in my pajamas the other day, and I was like, I'm at home, and yet, it's so impactful, and you can see it happening, and it's on the other side of the world. It's so incredible what tech can do. And I sat there and I did 20 buildings, in like 20 minutes, and I think the scale and impact of that in such a short amount of time, just kind of blows my mind, and always makes me, just so inspired by what can be done.
I feel like you need to write a book about the cool stuff going on out there. It seems like you're almost like an encyclopedia of like the most interesting not-for-profits and community businesses that are operating, because they are all looking for skills, and you're a really great almost like hub point for them. So I hope you do that. I hope you go and create a magazine or something, so that we can all find out about these amazing businesses and where all the cool stuff is happening.
Next project,
yeah, add another one to the list. I think that's probably a good place to stop on all these highlights, because I've got that glow. I don't know about you. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I've loved having you.
Thanks, Bex. It was so lovely to chat, and it's made my day. Thank you.
Anyone else suddenly have an overwhelming urge to get out there and volunteer your time and skills? Do it. Check out wearematchable.com and see whether this could work for your organisation. We'll be back soon with more inspiring stories from the front line of entrepreneurship. See you soon.